When John Garner went to bed beside his wife on the night of January 1st, 2018, he had no idea it would be the last night of his life. Just hours after celebrating another wedding anniversary, 2 gunshots shattered the silence inside their Texas home. His wife, Sandra, would later tell investigators that a masked intruder had broken into the house. According to her, the man claimed John had ruined his life by firing him from his job. He allegedly spared Sandra, stole thousands of dollars in cash, and disappeared into the night. But as detectives dug deeper, the story became increasingly difficult to believe. The gun that killed John belonged to Sandra. It was discovered days later, hidden inside her own locked car, after police had already searched that same vehicle and found nothing. Sandra was arrested, charged with murder, and spent nearly 2 years behind bars awaiting trial. Yet after hearing all the evidence, a Texas jury returned a shocking verdict. Not guilty. To this day, no one has ever been convicted of killing John Garner. So what really happened that night? Let's examine the evidence. John Kevin Garner was born in November 1975. Unlike many high-profile murder victims, very little is publicly known about his early life. Friends and coworkers knew him instead as a hardworking businessman who built a successful career through years of experience in warehouse operations and logistics. Eventually, John became vice president of operations for a packaging company in Northeast Texas. He earned a reputation as a strict but effective manager who wasn't afraid to fire employees who failed to meet expectations. That reputation would later become one of the central pieces of the investigation. While working in the same industry, John met Sandra, a manager responsible for quality and safety. Sandra was more than a decade older than John. She had already experienced 2 failed marriages and was raising 2 children, Wes and Andrea. Despite their different backgrounds, the relationship moved quickly. Only 2 years after meeting, they traveled to Las Vegas and were married on New Year's Eve. John didn't just marry Sandra. He became part of her family. Her son Wes later described John as the father figure he never had. Although Andrea initially struggled to accept her new stepfather, their relationship gradually improved over time. To outsiders, the couple appeared deeply committed to one another. Family members often described them as happy, hardworking, and financially secure. Everything changed in 2014. Sandra was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The illness slowly took away much of her independence. Medication left her feeling sick, depression became a constant battle, and according to Sandra, there were moments when she questioned whether life was worth living. She later claimed she even discussed suicide with John. According to her, John responded by saying he couldn't imagine life without her. Whether those conversations happened exactly as described or not, one thing became clear. John devoted himself to caring for his wife. He became both her caregiver and the family's primary source of income. Watching this transformation changed how Sandra's daughter viewed him. She began seeing John as the person who never walked away when life became difficult. In 2016, the couple moved from Paris, Texas, to the small town of Maple. The move wasn't for work. It was to be closer to family members who could help as Sandra's condition worsened. Relatives lived nearby. John's father and stepmother were directly across the street. Sandra's mother also lived in the area. The family visited frequently, creating a close-knit environment where everyone knew each other's routines. John also had another well-known habit. He loved firearms. According to Sandra, the couple kept dozens of guns throughout the house so one would always be within reach if needed. Among them was a Taurus .38 caliber revolver that John had specifically given Sandra for personal protection. Financially, life seemed comfortable. The couple owned a nice home, several vehicles, savings, and had invested heavily in improving their property. From the outside, there appeared to be little reason to expect tragedy. On December 31, 2017, John and Sandra celebrated another wedding anniversary. The following day was ordinary. Sandra's son Wes stopped by to visit before leaving that evening. As far as investigators could determine, he was one of the last people besides Sandra to see John alive. That night, the couple went to bed. During the early morning hours of January 2nd, everything changed. Sandra dialed 911. She told dispatchers that a masked man had entered their bedroom carrying both a flashlight and a gun. According to Sandra, the intruder claimed John had fired him years earlier, destroying both his career and his family. The man supposedly recognized Sandra from work and told her he wouldn't hurt her because she had always treated him fairly. He then forced her to retrieve a fireproof safe containing approximately $18,000 in cash. After taking the money, he ordered Sandra to stay where she was and count to 100 before calling for help. When officers arrived, they searched every room of the house. The gunman was nowhere to be found. Instead, they discovered John Garner lying on the bedroom floor. He had been shot multiple times. He died at the scene. As investigators processed the crime scene, they quickly began collecting physical evidence that could either support or completely dismantle Sandra's story. An autopsy confirmed that John had been struck by .38 caliber bullets. One projectile was recovered from his body, while another was found lodged inside a pillow on the bed. The caliber matched the type of revolver Sandra owned. But at that point, the gun itself was missing. Police searched the home, the garage, and every vehicle on the property. Nothing. Then another discovery shifted the investigation. While examining electronic devices in the home, detectives uncovered an internet search made just 4 days before John's death. The search asked how someone could kill a person while they were sleeping. Another search reportedly opened an article discussing ways to commit murder without being caught. To investigators, the timing was impossible to ignore. Sandra insisted she had nothing to do with those searches, but the discovery immediately made her a prime suspect. There was another piece of evidence that complicated matters. Investigators tested Sandra for gunshot residue. Only a tiny amount was found. Unfortunately, because officers hadn't properly secured her hands immediately after the shooting, experts couldn't determine whether the particles came from firing a weapon or from simple contamination at the crime scene. It was evidence that neither proved nor cleared her. The investigation itself also faced serious problems. Maple was a small town, and its police department had never handled a homicide of this magnitude. The responding police chief was leading his very first murder investigation. In those early hours, several mistakes were made. Some of the first crime scene photographs were taken using the chief's personal cell phone. Later, those images disappeared and were never recovered. Official crime scene photographs weren't taken until hours after officers, emergency personnel, and investigators had already walked through the home multiple times. Those mistakes would later become a major issue in court. For several days, detectives still couldn't find the murder weapon. Then Sandra's son, Wes, mentioned something that caught investigators' attention. He told them his mother normally kept her Taurus revolver underneath the driver's seat of her Mustang. Police returned to the property. The Mustang was locked inside the garage. After obtaining a spare key, investigators searched the vehicle once again. This time, they found the revolver. It was wrapped in paper towels and sealed inside plastic bags beneath the driver's seat. The discovery changed everything. When forensic testing was completed, the results confirmed that the bullets recovered from John's body had been fired from that exact gun. Sandra was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. Her bail was initially set at $2 million, later reduced to $1 million, and eventually lowered again to $500,000. Because she couldn't afford to post bond, she remained in jail while waiting for trial. In total, Sandra spent nearly 21 months behind bars before she ever stood before a jury. When the trial finally began in September 2019, prosecutors argued that all the evidence pointed toward one conclusion. They believed Sandra had murdered her husband and invented the story about the masked intruder to hide what she had done. Over several weeks, jurors heard testimony from dozens of witnesses and reviewed hundreds of pieces of evidence. Sandra made the risky decision to testify in her own defense. During cross-examination, prosecutors challenged her about the suspicious internet searches and questioned inconsistencies in her statements. At times, Sandra struggled to answer. The prosecution argued those inconsistencies suggested deception. Her defense attorneys saw them differently. They argued Sandra's multiple sclerosis, depression, medication, trauma, and the passage of nearly 2 years had affected her memory. Then they turned the spotlight back onto the investigation itself. The defense highlighted one troubling fact after another. Police had searched the Mustang immediately after the murder and found no weapon. Only days later, after Wes told investigators exactly where to look, the gun suddenly appeared beneath the driver's seat. That raised an important question. If officers had already searched the vehicle, how did the revolver end up there later? The defense also pointed out that no fingerprints or usable DNA connected Sandra to the weapon. The plastic wrapping and damp paper towels had destroyed any biological evidence that might have identified whoever handled it last. They reminded jurors that the earliest crime scene photographs had vanished. Sandra's hands had never been properly preserved for accurate gunshot residue testing. The Mustang wasn't immediately secured as evidence. Even the outside door handle of the vehicle had never been tested for fingerprints. Perhaps most surprising of all, investigators discovered that the internet searches could have been made from a device accessible to more than one person inside the house. That meant prosecutors couldn't conclusively prove Sandra had performed those searches herself. Even the police chief admitted on the witness stand that mistakes had been made during the investigation. Those admissions became some of the strongest points in the defense's case. After nearly a month of testimony, the case was finally placed in the jury's hands. Prosecutors had presented what they believed was a compelling chain of evidence. The murder weapon belonged to Sandra. Suspicious internet searches had been made just days before John's death. And she was the only known person inside the home when the shooting occurred. But criminal trials aren't decided by suspicion. They're decided by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense argued that while the prosecution had raised questions, it had failed to answer the biggest one. Who actually pulled the trigger? After only a few hours of deliberation, the jury reached its decision. Sandra Garner was found not guilty. After spending nearly 2 years in jail awaiting trial, Sandra Garner walked out of the courtroom a free woman after a jury found her not guilty. Legally, the case was closed, but for John's family, the pain and suspicion remained. Many believed Sandra was responsible, and the verdict only deepened the divide. She eventually returned to the home where John was killed, saying it was the place where she still felt closest to him. Her relationship with her stepson, Wes, completely collapsed. During the investigation, Wes had told police where Sandra's revolver was usually kept, leading detectives to the murder weapon. After the trial, Sandra publicly suggested Wes may have been involved, but investigators never found evidence to support that claim, and he was never charged. Years later, the case continues to divide true crime experts and the public. The evidence against Sandra initially appeared convincing. The murder weapon belonged to her, suspicious internet searches had been made days before the killing, and she was the only known person inside the house. But as the trial unfolded, serious problems emerged. The gun wasn't found during the first police search but appeared days later in a second search. No fingerprints or DNA linked Sandra to the weapon, the gunshot residue evidence was inconclusive, and the internet searches couldn't be tied exclusively to her because others had access to the same device. Investigators also faced criticism for mishandling the case. Early crime scene photographs disappeared, the vehicle containing the gun wasn't immediately secured, and key fingerprint evidence was never collected. While these mistakes didn't prove Sandra's innocence, they created enough reasonable doubt to prevent a conviction. The biggest mystery remains the same. If Sandra wasn't the killer, then who was? Was the masked intruder story true, or did investigators overlook another suspect? And perhaps the most puzzling question of all, how did the murder weapon end up inside the car after police had already searched it? No witness saw the shooting. No surveillance footage captured the killer. No confession was ever made, and no forensic evidence identified who pulled the trigger. More than 8 years later, John Garner's murder remains officially unsolved. Whether justice was served or the truth was lost because of investigative mistakes is a question that may never be answered. What do you think happened that night? Share your theory in the comments, and if you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true crime stories. Thanks for watching.